to our political correspondent, Melissa Clark, at Parliament House in Canberra. And Melissa, we can be sure that Wayne Swan will be closely watching at 2:30 this afternoon when the RBA makes its announcement.
You need to look straight
everyone in Canberra will be watching this very closely because the issue of interest rates is one that is always a hot political issue in Canberra at Parliament House. So not only will Wayne Swan be watching it closely, but the opposition will be too. And joining me from Sydney is the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Matthias Cormann. Matthias, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Now, Wayne Swan has already gone out on the offensive, warning the banks not to lift their interest rates higher than any official cash rate rise that we might get today. Are the banks going to listen to him?
Well, he hasn't been very successful with that so far. The difference between the official cash rate and the mortgage rates paid by families and business loans, interest rates for business loans paid by businesses, are much higher than what they have been for a very long time. There's been a significant increase in the difference between the official cash rate and the interest rates charged by the banks on Wayne Swan's watch. So he really is coming out after the horse has bolted.
What can he do, though? How can he convince the banks they are working in a market situation where the government doesn't control them? Is there anything he can realistically do?
Well, I mean, the government is addicted to excessive spending and debt, which is why there continues to be upward pressure on interest rates. And if there is an interest rate rise today, it will be the seventh interest rate rise in 12 months, and the responsibility will squarely sit with Wayne Swan and Julia Gillard. As far as the banks are concerned, there's no doubt that for political reasons, Wayne Swan is coming out to talk tough today. But of course, on his watch, the problem has actually become worse, not better. And our concern is that this is not the end of the road yet either. I mean, economists are talking about potentially another 1% increase in interest rates between now and the end of next year.
But is the situation in Australia really that bad? If we get a quarter of a percentage point rate rise today, that brings us to 4.75%. That's still below the long-term average of around 5%. Are you scaremongering a little bit by saying interest rates are going up and up and up? They're still at historically a reasonable level.
Well, interest rates in Australia have bottomed out earlier and increased faster than in other parts of the world. And the problem we've got is that we've got a government which continues to spend because it says it needs to stimulate the economy, while the Reserve Bank is putting the brakes on with 6 interest rates rises so far over the last 12 months. So really there's a complete inconsistency there. And there's absolutely no doubt that the government's continued addiction to excessive spending continues to put upward pressure on interest rates, which means that families and businesses across Australia have to pay more for their interest rates for their loans than what they should have to.
Now, on the issue of spending, the Department of Finance has warned the government as part of the Red Book that it prepared for it that it would need to find major savings in the budget to pay for around $2.5 billion worth of promises made to the independents. What should the government be cutting, in your view, to make those savings necessary to keep us on track for a surplus in 2012-13?
Well, I mean, Treasury and Finance have both given very clear advice to the government that they need to tighten fiscal policy, i.e. that they have to cut spending. There's a whole range of areas where there's been waste and mismanagement over the past 3 or so years. In the school halls program, the home insulation fiasco, you name it. There is areas across government where this government has mismanaged taxpayer dollars. And
the government is saying that, and has said for some time, that one of the biggest things it can do to save money in the budget is to means test the private health insurance rebate, which has been something that the coalition's blocked. Would you reconsider supporting that so that the budget is in a better fiscal position?
Well, it's a false saving, and it actually is a completely. It's one of the many broken promises of the Labor administration, putting more pressure on public hospitals, forcing more expenditure on public hospitals by taking resources out of the private health system is not a very sensible fiscal policy. Every dollar invested in the private health insurance rebate, of course, attracts $2 additional of private investment from those that take additional responsibility for their own healthcare needs. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk and not much sensible action there.
Well, what about defence? That's an area that Treasury and Finance have pointed to, and the government has said it will keep increasing defence spending above a real level of increase at around 3%. Do you think that needs to be reconsidered?
Well, I mean, the government has to put a fine-tooth comb across its spending, and there's many areas of the Gillard government where there is waste and mismanagement. And first and foremost, the government should reconsider its stimulus spending. The stimulus spending clearly is no longer justified. We always thought it was excessive right from the word go. There's no doubt that it has put upward pressure on interest rates, and we're now in a circumstance, of course, where the Reserve Bank might well increase interest rates for the seventh time in 12 months, going completely counter to the fiscal policy adopted by the government.
Now, if the coalition were in government now, we know from what we saw on the ABC's Four Corners program last night that the coalition had offered a more generous package in financial terms to the independents in their effort to get them on board to form a minority government. Wouldn't you, if you were in government, be in a worse off position in terms of the budget balance because you had promised more to the independents than the Labor Party has?
Absolutely not. We identified about $50 billion in savings in the lead-up to the last election. We very clearly had a fiscal plan, a sound fiscal plan that would have ensured that Australia had a larger surplus than they would have had under this current administration. And indeed, a lot of the assumptions that the government has based its budget on are still very questionable, whether they're assumptions in relation to the mining tax revenue estimates, which the government continues to be secret, or whether it is whether there are assumptions in relation to some of the spending commitments, dare I say it, moving forward.
And just briefly, one last question. There's been reports today that numerous people in the coalition would like to see a change to the coalition's work policy on industrial relations and see a return to the policy of wanting to give small businesses exemptions from unfair dismissal laws. What's your point of view?
Look, our policy leading into the last election was crystal clear. We committed not to make any changes to the workplace relations laws. Work choices is dead, and as far as I'm concerned, that is our policy.
Matthias Cormann, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And Joe will know precisely what the Reserve Bank Board thinks about whether or not interest rates should go up in just a few hours when they meet and make their decision.
Thank you, Melissa Clark. So that's 2:30 this afternoon.